Welcome to Pages from the Dark Side, the monthly book club podcast with a specialization in spooky with a new series today. I am your host, Dylan Ludwig, aka Mr. Hyperware, and with me as always is my lovely wife and co-host,
Alyssa Ludwig, also known as the Earbud Bookworm.
Today we are kicking off the inaugural episode of our King Korner series, which is our tribute to, of course, the great Stephen King. And what better book to start with than his first real big bestseller book, Carrie. I want to bring up something that, because we had talked about doing other series on this podcast outside the mainline stuff, and King Korner was one that was brought up very early on.
Yeah, I think it was probably the first one we talked about.
So I want to give a special shout out to the podcast, the King Cast, which is part of the Fangoria network. This was kind of one of the big inspirations for not just coming up with this series, but also a big inspiration for me to help bring up the idea of even starting this podcast in the first place. The people that host that, currently Eric Vespi and Anthony Bresnikan, formerly also the late Scott Wampler, who was also a writer for Fangoria. I've talked about him before.
Yeah.
Their format on that show, and just them even deciding to do that show, it had a lot of influence on me wanting to do this.
Okay. I'm not familiar with it, so I just wanted to do this because I thought it would be fun.
Yeah, that show is, because there's a lot more direct interface with Hollywood because of Fangoria.
Right.
They have a lot of guests on that show.
Right. That's what I've heard.
Everything from actors, directors, other writers, and even authors. Stephen Graham Jones has been on a few episodes of that.
Oh, cool.
As well as like a lot of recognizable names like Joe Lansdale. A lot of Guillermo del Toro has been on an episode of it.
Okay, cool. I'll have to check it out at some point.
Yeah. Flula Borg.
I love Flula Borg.
I actually did an episode about Carrie.
Okay.
On that show.
Nice.
And so I want to take a cue from them and kick us off by asking, what is your Stephen King origin story? How did you discover the work of Stephen King?
So I discovered the work of Stephen King before I ever read it. Mm-hmm. Before I ever read it myself. Stephen King has just always been in the house because my mom is a huge Stephen King fan.
Yeah.
So we're recording this in our library room, and we always had like a whole shelf of Stephen King. So I always wanted to read it, and of course my mom's always like, "You're not old enough yet. You're not old enough yet." I don't think I read any until I was an adult. Mm-hmm. I think I was a full adult before I read my first Stephen King. The first one I ever read was The Green Mile, and I read it in its serialized format, like the way it first came out.
Yeah, not as like a collected version.
Right, which he actually rewrote somewhat to put it into a single novel. So I read like the six book series novelization of that, and that was the first thing I read of Stephen King, and that was back before I did audiobooks. So I did that, like the print books, and I read it at the gym. Mm-hmm. Like I would get on the stationary bike and just read, and so that was my first introduction to Stephen King.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people's introduction to Stephen King, especially of our generation or of a later generation, tends to be they've seen the movies first.
Right, and
then
I don't.
The books follow.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, the first Stephen King movie I saw was actually probably also The Green Mile, and I actually think I might have seen the movie first. No, I didn't. I think I read the book first.
For me, I was also. It came to me first in the book form, but not for lack of trying. When I was, I want to say like probably 5th grade, I actually started to see his books get circulated around between classmates. And I was
That's elementary school.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay.
And I was definitely looking for. They weren't part of like that library. It was
like
obviously,
yes,
from home,
but
stuff
still.
Like that. And I was looking, being very much into horror at a young age, I was looking for that next jump.
Right.
Because I had done Goosebumps, I had done Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Fear Street was not something that I really got on my radar until like way later in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I started to see the name Stephen King get passed around. And there were 2 books that caught my attention. Well, 3 really, because a lot of people kept talking about it.
Well, of course.
Especially in relation to like the mini series with Tim Curry.
Right.
But two books caught my attention, and that was Cujo and Firestarter.
Okay.
And I discovered that they actually had film adaptations of those books, and I really wanted to watch them, and I begged my mom, hey, can we rent these from Blockbuster? Hey, can we borrow them from the library?
Right.
And she said, absolutely not.
Okay.
Despite the fact that I had started watching R-rated stuff at that point and started getting into horror and stuff, and, but it was very much like, vampires, werewolves, slashers. But
right.
She was very nervous about showing me Cujo, which is about a dog that gets rabies and attacks its family. So my grandmother actually, at one point, she lent me a big stack of Stephen King books once I expressed interest in that. That stack included stuff like Rose Madder, Bag of Bones, Cell, which was fitting because I started to explore zombies at that point too. Dreamcatcher was also there. We'll talk about Dreamcatcher later. And then in that was both Cujo and Firestarter. So
both the ones you were interested in.
So and my grandmother, she was like, look, he's probably not going to read them. He's probably just going to look at the cover and put it together like that. Just let him have it. And I read both those books cover to cover.
Of course.
And I don't think my mom realized how strong my imagination could be at that point.
I was going to say, that's something, like, I feel like my mom would have let me watch the movies over reading the books because the books, there's so much more you can do with your own imagination.
Yeah. And then,
you know what I mean?
And then you watch the movies and you go, well, the books go way harder than those movies do. Like, they pull some punches on those ones. And you've read both those books. You haven't seen, you saw the newer Firestarter, but you didn't see the Drew Barrymore one, I don't think. And I don't think you ever saw Cujo either.
No, I haven't.
So at that point, I started to work backwards and go, well, what else has he done? And that led me to two big things. One was The Shining, and then the other was Carrie.
Yes.
And Carrie was a big deal, especially in like my mom's childhood. She really remembers that movie very well. For those who are unfamiliar, there's a little bit of background on the book itself. Stephen King, at this point, he was teaching high school, I think, and he was really. He talks about this a lot, where he was really struggling to like afford medication for his children. They were hardly getting by, and he's like, I really need to sell a book.
Well, I think relevant is that he was writing. He was a paid writer, but he was writing for like men's magazines, and when I say men's, I mean like
Playboy,
like nudie magazines. For like, I didn't even realize they had stories in those, but they do.
Oh yeah, the original short story for The Fly was published in Playboy.
That is so wild. We actually, when we were cleaning out this room, I don't know, probably a decade ago, I found some books that were from like the Playboy like publishing. Like what?
Yeah, it's weird to think about because it's like, when you hear somebody go like, yeah, I collect Playboy to read the articles, you're like, sure you do.
Yeah, apparently they had like real like stories in them.
So,
anyway,
as the legend goes, Stephen King was writing it and just really not getting the hang of it and really struggling with it. And he threw part of that manuscript into the trash, only for his wife Tabitha to retrieve it and look it over and say, you actually do have something here. And that kind of becomes important because I feel like her involvement not only allows the book to get written, but because of her perspective from the female side of it, lends itself to the authenticity of the female voices in the book a lot more.
Yeah.
Because Stephen King, as well as he writes characters, is still limited by the fact that, well, he is a cis white man. So, for those who are not familiar with the plot of Carrie, it's pretty simple, all things considered. Carrie White is in the book, she's an overweight, very homely, and very undereducated teenager, who in the opening sequence of the book, she gets her first period, and that leads to this big hazing from all the other girls who start cruelly throwing tampons at her while she has no idea what the hell is going on.
Right, she thinks she's bleeding to death because her mom is a fundamental Christian and has told her absolutely nothing about periods.
Yeah. And through the course of this, she starts to realize that there are events that are happening in reaction to extreme emotion from her that is telekinetic powers.
Right.
And this all escalates to one of the other teenagers, Sue Snell, feeling remorse for the situation, asks her boyfriend, hey, can you ask her to the prom? And he kind of reluctantly is like, all right, sure, I'll do that. Because Sue was a part of the bullying in the opening sequence, so it is not even allowed to go to the prom in the first place. But
I think she was still allowed.
I guess it was in the movie versions. They made it to where she was like banned from being there.
I don't think she was banned in the movies either.
She okay. In the 2013 one, she did say, "I'm not even allowed to go."
Oh, well, I didn't catch that.
That's why the coach, Ms. Desjardins, was pushing her out. So, if you read the book, you know what happens from there.
Mm-hmm. And even if you haven't read the book, a lot of people just know from pop culture references and stuff.
Right. So, this is Stephen King's first novel. Mm-hmm. He has since written, Jesus Christ, 80 books since then?
I think maybe more than that. I have a spreadsheet somewhere.
Yeah. The dude just never...
It's a lot.
The dude just never stopped working.
I don't think he's hit 100 yet, but...
No.
But I think he's getting close.
Yeah. I think R.L. Stine still has a bigger body count than he does as far as books go. But
oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, to be fair...
Stine's stuff is a lot simpler to digest, whereas, Stephen King either goes back and forth between writing stuff that is very, short and sweet to read, like this, or he will write a fucking epic along the lines of The Stand, Under the Dome, 11. What's the JFK assassination one? I can't remember the date on that.
11/22/63.
Yes, thank you.
I think.
No, that's exactly it.
Okay.
So, and then his Dark Tower series, which is this whole sprawling epic.
Right.
This has still stood the test of time, though, as being considered one of his best works.
Right. And just a popular, I want to say, almost say gateway horror book.
Yeah. Now, why do you think that is? What is it about this that has the staying power that it does?
Well, I think a big part of it is the teenage experience. Mm-hmm. Because even when we're looking at it, because it is told through different perspectives, it's not just Carrie's. And so even when we're getting the perspectives of the bullies and stuff like that, it's just very much that visceral teenage experience where I didn't even go to public school, but I still could feel it. You know what I mean?
I think another factor is the fact that, as I mentioned before, Stephen King really knows how to write complex characters.
Yeah. Doesn't always know how to write endings.
No.
Doesn't always know how to write endings. Or dialogue, honestly.
Yeah.
But his characters are usually really well done.
Well, it's so funny because, even without him consciously doing it in this book, I feel like this book really sets up a lot of what we would come to expect from, the hallmarks of a lot of his later works. You have characters that have complexity to them. Mm-hmm. You have, as you mentioned, endings which are, most of the time misses more than hits.
Yeah.
Which I think, that factors into the, Stephen King has mentioned that his process on writing is that he just kind of writes and writes and writes and writes as he goes. Yeah, he doesn't outline. He just kind of goes.
He's a pantser.
Yeah.
He's a pantser.
And so I think some cases there is... you can get some good results from that, but a lot of cases I think he boxes himself into a corner and just kind of all right, I gotta finish this somehow.
Well, and that's what I think that's what makes it interesting when he does, because there have been a couple of I don't know that it's ever been a novel, but I've definitely heard him talk more than once about like short stories he's had where he's had the ending first.
Yeah.
And then he had to like figure out how to get there. And I feel like those usually are actually better.
Well, and this might be a controversial opinion, but I think horror works mostly better in short format anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that is kind of fair just
Yeah.
because when it's
And by the way,
long...
I'm not the only one that has that opinion. There's other horror novelists out there that have mentioned that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, because I think when it's long, there's too many places for it to kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I mean, it can be done.
And I also think that as somebody that studies horror a lot, I think that there's only so long that you can sustain fear in somebody in a story like that. And I think at the point that you hit like an epic length on a book, you get to a point where you go, okay, I can't stay tense for X amount of time in this.
Right.
I have that problem with, stuff like It, and like a lot of
I have other problems with it.
yeah. But like, I let it go with The Stand because The Stand has a lot of balance to it.
Right. And it's lots of back and forth between different characters and stuff.
Yeah, and that's a bigger story than what this is. While this one does bounce around on perspective a lot, it's still I think it's still his tightest novel because I think he didn't really have a choice. It's his first book.
Yeah.
And so he had to make a story that was very, direct and to the point and short and sweet without a lot of, places to embellish too much.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
There's the Stephen King bullies
Of
that
course.
become a hallmark of all of his works.
Yeah. Or
Although-
at least all of his works that involve, kids.
But the interesting thing about this book that sets it apart from a lot of later stuff that have those bullies, like It, where they're just straight up psychopaths.
Right.
You have a character like Sue Snell, who at the beginning of the book is a bully, and
Right.
she is taking part in the the cruelty that opens the story. But then, as the story goes along, she ends up becoming one of the most empathetic characters in the book.
Yeah.
Because she does have remorse.
Right.
She has a conscience, which is not something that you see in the other girl, Chris.
Right.
And I find that nuance really interesting, that it sustains here, but you don't see it a lot in later stuff that he would write.
Yeah. No, that is definitely true.
Like it, and it's a good example of how in this book there, you have characters. Not all characters that are bad people are all bad,
right?
And not all people who are good are all good,
right?
It's very much shades of gray.
Yeah, definitely.
Even Margaret White, who is probably the most terrifying character in the entire book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Carrie's mom, by the way.
Yeah. Who, because of the fact that she is a fundamental Christian, which I've been around a lot of fundamental Christians, and they're not pleasant to be around.
Yeah.
And King touches on religion a lot in his books, and he mentions this because he doesn't have an axe to grind or against religion or anything like that, which I'm like, all right, I find that a little hard to believe.
Right.
But
could have fooled me.
But here, I think it plays a central role into the theme of bullying.
Yeah.
Because if you think about what Christianity is, we know people that are Christian that are actually good Christians,
right? That are Christ-like.
Yeah,
yeah.
Because they're Jesus was somebody that was very much not about people that use religion to oppress others and leave people behind,
right?
And so the people that are the good Christians are like, well, that's because I'm with Jesus, man. I side with that guy. Whereas American Christianity is a very different thing from actual Christianity because it's much more nationalistic, and it is an institution that is based around bullying.
Right, exactly.
And so it just makes sense.
Right, and that's not a new thing.
Yeah, and it just makes sense that the biggest bully in Carrie's life ends up being that person.
Right, her mom, yeah.
Yeah, I just, there is so much about this that remains relevant today. You can, yes, it was published in 1970 something. I can't.
I think it
remember.
was 76, maybe. No, the movie was 76.
The movie was 76. But
74.
To be fair, the movie.
I have the book right here. keep talking.
The movie, it didn't take long for this to be optioned for a film.
Right.
I think it was United Artists that optioned it.
Yeah, 74 was the original copyright.
Yeah. And the interesting...
I'm horrible with the pop figures. I'm always knocking them over.
There's an outtake for you.
I mean, I'll just leave it in. I'm so sorry.
Oh, I'm just going to scooch on past you here.
Oh my gosh.
Most Ohio thing I've ever said.
Yeah. All right, so anyway, what were you saying?
About
the movie?
So, let's talk about the movie because I think... Did you read the book first or did you watch the movie first?
No, I read the book first. I got the book actually as a Christmas present from my first husband's grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Granny. She got me Carrie and Misery, and so I read both of those, and then I watched both of the movies after.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the Brian De Palma film from 76?
I like that one. It's definitely not faithful to the book, but very few adaptations are faithful to books in general, but especially with Stephen King. It's so hard to put all of his book on the screen because a lot of it is thought and, book clippings or, newspaper clippings and books excerpts and stuff like that.
A bunch of epistolary elements in the book.
So that makes it a little difficult to be completely faithful to the book on screen. But I would say in general, I did really enjoy the movie, and I think had I not read the book first, I actually probably would have enjoyed it more because I wouldn't have been comparing it,
Yeah.
And objectively, it is a good movie.
Yeah. I think, I having rewatched it, there's a lot that I have much more of an awareness to with that movie than I did when I first watched it. One big thing that is always something that I think about, especially looking into the history of film itself, was that if you look back at when that movie came out, there's really not any precedent for the kind of movie that is. You had other kind of horror movies that were trying to be, on the classier side,
right?
I should say, but they're you had Jaws, you had The Exorcist, you had The Omen, and then you had Rosemary's Baby would probably be another one, and then ultimately you have Carrie. All these movies together are game changing for the genre.
Yeah, definitely.
There's really nothing like this movie from the choices that De Palma is making in the direction to how he's telling the actors to play their parts.
Right.
And it's another piece into this movement that was going on in the 70s, which is that you really had a lot of these maverick directors coming in and kind of changing what the landscape of cinema is going to be. Which is that they lean more into realism, but there's also this kind of weird dreamlike quality to it.
Almost like surreal realism.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Good examples of this are something like Taxi Driver, and
which I've never seen,
and Apocalypse Now.
Also never seen.
Yeah. And it's also a movement where you had really complicated protagonists that were not all good people. Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver is a sociopath.
Right.
But the movie allows you to have empathy for him to a certain degree.
Okay.
Something that they would replicate later in Joker, which is almost a carbon copy of Taxi Driver.
Well, I remember you telling me that when we saw it.
And, it works very well in that first Joker movie. Maybe not as well the second time around. But
did you see the second one?
I did watch it, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you watched it without me.
Yeah.
No, it's fine.
We talked about it.
I know we did.
I
don't...
You know what?
I don't think I remember you telling me you watched it. But anyway.
Brief sidebar here. I don't think Joker Folie à Deux is as bad as everybody else is saying it is.
Well, I'll have to watch it myself to form
I
an opinion.
actually like a lot of chunks in it. It doesn't work as a whole, but...
Yes.
Anyway, to bring it back around.
Yes.
So... Carrie ends up becoming another piece in that, where you have Carrie White is just especially the way Sissy Spacek plays it,
Yeah.
you cannot help but have your heart break for this girl.
Oh, yeah.
Because she has no idea what's going on with the world around her, because her mother, who has just sheltered her entire life and just and completely broken her down as a person.
Right.
Like, before we even get to see the full extent of her arc in that story.
Right.
And while Sissy Spacek does not resemble Carrie in the book,
Right.
you can't help but feel like she fits with the role, because she has this quality about her that when you look at her, you go, she doesn't look entirely human. Like, there's something about her that's just off.
Yeah.
And I think that also plays very well into when you get to that prom sequence, when the switch flips.
Yeah.
And she just goes completely still. The eyes are wide.
Oh my gosh.
Her arms are stretched out to be kind of like a
Yeah.
witch's pose. It's undeniably terrifying.
Oh yeah. No, definitely scary.
Yeah. But the movie also has this very interesting dreamlike quality to it.
Yeah.
Like how these other 70s movies I bring up had as well. And because it's all playing with the idea of subjectivity.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of this through her point of view. To the point where, when the pig blood hits her, and her vision goes kaleidoscopic, and she's imagining everybody laughing at her.
Right.
Including the coach, who's been nothing but kind to her, and you're just kind of watching it going, why the fuck is she laughing? And then you realize, oh, she's not. That's just how she's perceiving it. Yeah. I think that there's a lot more that I appreciate about that movie, thinking like in a new light now than when I did when I first watched it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I wish I could extend the same grace over to the Chloe Grace Moretz
My gosh.
2013
Puns.
adaptation.
Puns.
Which
Actually, is that a pun? It's play on words. Anyway.
Which there's qualities about it that I like.
Yeah, like I said, like you asked me when we finished it, whether like what my thoughts on it were, and I was like, I think I liked the older one better, but there were parts of the newer one that I liked better.
Yeah, I think Julianne Moore is a better Margaret White.
Yeah, I agree.
I like Piper Laurie, but she's very much playing into the archetype of like a TV like a televangelist that became super popular like in the late 70s, early 80s.
Well, and I mean, she almost
feels larger than life.
Funny enough, she actually almost, with the whole her calling Carrie a witch, she kind of reminded me of a witch.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that Julianne Moore's portrayal reminded me of a witch. Like, she was very much more just like,
there's
yeah,
it's
terrifying.
It's a
honestly.
complicated performance because it feels more real, or it feels at least maybe not more real, because there are people like how Piper Laurie plays out there, but there's this layered subtlety to her where you can feel that she does have love for her daughter, but she's incredibly misguided by that because of these fundamentalist beliefs, which are very separatist and very much trying to not be associated with the outside world.
Right.
And she tries to protect her daughter by packing that fundamentalism down into her. But the problem is, when you pack fundamentalism down into a person, when that breaks, it breaks really fucking badly.
Right. And then if you've got telekinetic powers, then,
it
just takes it a whole different level.
That's another element of the book that I thought was kind of interesting, is that you can see the seeds of Stephen King already doing some world building even in this first book.
Yeah.
Because with all the epistolary elements of the news articles, the court cases, the interviews, he's already sowing the seeds for what you would see kind of develop later in something like Firestarter with the shop, and also like taking a look at, okay, well, what are these other psychokinetic abilities that these other kids have? Oh, there's somebody that can push thoughts into another person's head. There's somebody that can, who is pyrokinetic.
Right.
Even to extend it to something like The Shining, of like, oh, this kid can talk to ghosts, and he can, and he has his own like telepathic abilities,
Right.
And it's like he's already kind of building out like he might not be aware of this, but he's already building out a little corner in this bigger universe
Right.
of his.
Well, and who knows? Maybe he did know. Like, maybe he had little notebooks full of all that crap. Because, like I mentioned earlier, he was already doing short stories for, magazines. So he may have already had some of that in his head of like, ooh, if I get to write more, then this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah. And it's like, I always like to think that he's got these certain corners of his world that are sectioned off, which is something like you got the Dark Tower, you've got Castle Rock, you've got Derry, Maine,
Right.
and then you've got the shop, which I think later he kind of retconned that to be the book The Institute. I don't know if you ever read that one.
I haven't read that one.
Which I heard was fine. It was kind of like his take on New Mutants, I guess.
Okay.
But again, it all comes back to this book.
Yeah. The OG.
Yeah. Now, I do want to briefly mention that there, as of this recording, there is still a new TV, I think, miniseries adaptation in the work. Mm-hmm. That's from Mike Flanagan.
Right, which we're big fans of Flanagan, so...
And I feel like he, at this point, has positioned himself to be, like the premier Stephen King adapter at this point.
Yeah.
Like, we always get, like, a couple, like, one every generation. We had Frank Darabont, and now with, like, The Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile, and now we've got Flanagan.
Right.
Because he, like, Gerald's Game, Dr. Sleep. Now we got Life of Chuck on the way, which I'm really excited for. So, I have a lot of, and then we're both big Haunting of Hill House fans.
Right.
So, I have a lot of expectation for this to be good.
Yeah. I'm very hopeful.
Mike, if you're watching this, I'm watching you.
Oh my gosh.
Don't fuck that up. Let's go ahead to ratings on the book.
All right, cool.
So, I definitely have a lot of appreciation for this book, going back and reading it now, and I'm happy that it exists, because without it, we don't have Stephen King as it is now.
Right.
It still does have a lot of, what I would call first book syndrome.
Right. And I will say, there is some stuff in it that is a somewhat problematic thing over the whole catalog of Stephen King's work.
It dates itself pretty
badly.
Well,
not just the dating itself, but, he's got, some issues with race.
Yeah, and yeah.
So
it started here, and it continued on a lot of other stuff. Yes.
So there is that to consider.
So there's that. But I do think that it's, it is definitely the big start for this guy hitting the ground running. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's funny because the book was not a bestseller when it first came out.
Right.
But it really got propped up by De Palma's film. Mm-hmm. Because then all of a sudden when people saw that, they were like, oh, there's a book of this? Oh, shit. And then they went and checked that out. And so really those two worked hand in hand to have Stephen King become this new marquee name. Because now it's like, if you talk to anybody, I doubt you'll find anybody who doesn't really know who Stephen King is.
Right, even if they've never read his books, they at least know who he is. Yeah. You know what I mean?
He's just ever present now, and and I'm always seeing new editions of this on the shelf.
Oh yeah.
Especially now we've got like the new reprinting. It's got this beautiful cover of like the prom tiara, but it's made out of blood.
Oh, okay.
And it's dripping upwards. It's
interesting.
Really cool. I'll probably have that become the picture that we use for the thumbnail here. But
okay.
Yeah. But yeah. First novel syndrome and some dated ideas weighs this book down quite a bit. Mm-hmm. It's still 4 skulls.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I would say I'm going to give it a 4, but it's like if we did half ratings on this channel, I'd probably do like 3.5, maybe 3.75.
A high 3.5
yeah.
high 3 out of 5, yeah.
Yeah, we'll round up to 4.
Yeah. So yeah.
Definitely not my favorite King book ever.
No.
But also not my least favorite. So, and I have not read them all yet, which is why I am not reading the book that is out hopefully, if we get this out on time, it's coming out today, yes?
Yeah, Never Flinch should be releasing, if not, by today when we post this, hopefully. But definitely within this week.
Right, yeah.
Which is, I think, the next installment in his Holly Gibney stuff, if I'm not mistaken.
I actually have no idea.
Because, he's obsessed with that character now.
I mean, she's a good character.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we didn't pre-order that book or anything because I am currently working my way through his bibliography since it is a connected universe. I realized partway through reading one of his books, because I was reading them out of order, I was like, this is a book, this is a reference to a book I haven't read yet, and so I realized I need to read them in order, and I'm only up to, I think, the early 2000s right now.
Yeah, I think you just finished, Nightmares and Dreamscapes or something like that?
No, I'm past that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, I'm not to 2000s yet, because I'm the next book on my roster is Rose Madder, which I have never read before.
Oh, that one's going to be fun.
I've not read it.
That
so
one's very
and
weird.
It keeps coming in on Libby, but I was finishing other books first, so hopefully I'll get to that one soon.
I'm always hoping that somebody out there will take a shot at adapting Rose Madder, because it's a really ambitious one.
Well, I'll let you know how I like it after I read it.
Yeah.
And I am getting back to my YouTube soon. So when I do read it, I will, have a little thing on there.
Yep. So thank you guys for watching this first installment of King Korner. We're definitely going to be doing a lot more of these.
Yes.
We are trying really hard to broaden our horizons for what we can do on here instead of just one random book or seemingly random book a month. And we want to make this a lot more than what it used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm having a lot of fun doing it.
I am too.
Yeah.
And so even if we never get an audience, but hopefully we do, I just enjoy having this time with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you like our rambling and how weird we are and, cursing and all that, go ahead and hit subscribe. And if you would like to, you can let us know what your favorite Stephen King book is in the comments.
Yep. And if you have any suggestions for anything that we should be checking out, whether it's Stephen King or just any other, genre book, it doesn't have to be horror, but that is our specialization.
Yep.
You can either comment below or you can email at us at pagesfromthedarkside, all one word, @gmail.com. And if you ever want us to send us anything, there's a P.O. box address linked into our description.
Yeah, and we love snail mail.
Yeah, we do.
All right.
All right. So with that said, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter of
Pages from the Dark Side.
This has been a production of Pages from the Dark Side. Sound and video production by Alyssa and Dylan Ludwig. Music and artwork by Aaron Shively.